How many contradictory ideas can a single mind hold before it starts to ache? We are told of an all-loving God, yet we see a world overflowing with purposeless suffering. We are told of miracles that defy physics, yet we live in a world governed by immutable natural laws. This internal friction has a name: cognitive dissonance. It's the mental stress we experience when holding two or more conflicting beliefs. In this video, we'll explore how religion is perhaps the most masterful system ever devised for both creating and managing this dissonance. We'll break down the psychological tools, the intellectual acrobatics, and emotional justifications that faith provides to soothe the logical paradoxes it demands you accept. It's a fascinating look at the mental gymnastics required to maintain belief in a world that constantly argues against it. Thinking this way often puts you in the minority. If you value this kind of psychological exploration, support the channel by liking and subscribing. And to get a sense of our global community of skeptics, let us know in the comments where you're from and whether you feel that pressure to perform these mental gymnastics in your daily life. The anatomy of a mental split. Before we can properly place religion under our microscope, we must first understand the psychological principle at play. The term cognitive dissonance was coined by the social psychologist Leon Festinger in 1957, and it describes a state of mental discomfort experienced by a person who holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, or is confronted by new information that conflicts with existing beliefs, ideas, or values. At its core, it's about the brain's deep, primal need for consistency. Our minds are like meticulous housekeepers. They despise clutter, contradiction, and things being out of place. When two of our thoughts are at war with each other, it creates a psychological static, an anxiety, an inner turmoil that the mind desperately wants to resolve. The classic textbook example is the smoker. Let's imagine a man named Bob. Bob has a cognition, a piece of knowledge. I smoke a pack of cigarettes every day. He also has another very solid cognition. Smoking causes lung cancer, heart disease, and a horrible, painful death. Now, these two cognitions are in direct conflict. They are dissonant. They cannot both be true and good in Bob's mind without creating that internal stress. So Bob's brain, that diligent housekeeper, must do something to tidy up this mental mess. He has a few options. Option 1 is to change his behavior. He can quit smoking. If he stops smoking, the cognition, I smoke a pack a day, becomes I do not smoke, and the conflict is resolved. This is often the hardest path as it requires a significant change in behavior and a battle with addiction. Option 2, and this is where things get interesting, is to change one of the cognitions, or at least to justify it. He can't really change the fact that smoking is harmful. The evidence is overwhelming. But he can attack the importance of that cognition. He might start saying things like, the research is overblown, or my grandfather smoked his whole life and lived to be 95. He is actively seeking out information that supports his behavior, like stories of long-lived smokers, and avoiding information that confronts it, like graphic images on cigarette packs. He is, in essence, diluting the dissonant thought. Option 3 is to add a new consonant cognition that bridges the gap between the two conflicting ones. He might tell himself, yes, smoking is bad for my health, but it's the only thing that helps me manage my stress. If I didn't smoke, my anxiety would be so high it would probably give me a heart attack anyway. See what he did there? He's created a new belief that smoking is a necessary medical tool for his stress, which reframes the negative behavior as a net positive. The dissonance is reduced not because the facts have changed, but because the psychological narrative surrounding them has. This process is happening inside our heads all the time, in ways large and small. It's the reason you might feel a pang of unease after making a big, expensive purchase, and then immediately spend the next week telling all your friends about its amazing features, conveniently forgetting the drawbacks you were worried about before you bought it. This is called post-purchase rationalization. You're not trying to convince your friends, you're trying to convince yourself that your behavior, spending the money, and your belief, I am a smart person who makes good decisions, are in alignment. So, to summarize this crucial mechanism, when faced with a conflict between what we believe and what we do, or between two conflicting beliefs, our mind experiences stress. To alleviate this stress, we will instinctively and automatically try to change our behavior, change our belief, or minimize the importance of the conflicting belief. Add a new belief that justifies or rationalizes the conflict. The key takeaway is this: the human mind is not fundamentally a truth-seeking machine. It is a consistency-seeking machine. It will often prioritize feeling coherent over being correct. It will bend, warp, and reinterpret reality itself to maintain a sense of internal harmony. It is this fundamental, predictable, and exploitable feature of our own wetware that makes religious belief not only possible, but incredibly resilient in the face of overwhelming contradictory evidence. With this framework in place, let's now turn our attention to the greatest dissonance generation engine ever conceived: religion, the divine dissonance generator. If you were to design a system specifically to create cognitive dissonance, you would be hard-pressed to invent a more perfect model than mainstream monotheistic religion. It is an exquisite paradox. It presents a set of extraordinary claims about reality, and then releases its believers into a world that, on a moment-by-moment basis, appears to systematically and comprehensively contradict those very claims. This isn't a bug in the system, it is the central feature. It is this constant churning dissonance that creates the need for the very tools that religion then so conveniently provides. Let's dissect the most prominent examples. The first and most gargantuan is the infamous problem of evil. This is the Mount Everest of theological contradictions. Let's lay out the cognitions as Festinger would. Cognition. A. There exists an all-powerful, omnipotent, all-knowing, omniscient, and all-good, omnibenevolent God who created and presides over the universe. Cognition. B. The world is filled with profound, horrific, and often entirely senseless suffering. These two cognitions are not just in tension, they are in a state of all-out war. It's not just about human-on-human cruelty, which can be partially deflected by other arguments. It is the raw, natural, and brutal reality of existence. A 5-year-old child with terminal bone cancer writhing in agony. A fawn burning alive in a forest fire started by a lightning strike. The sheer, pointless horror of a tsunami that drowns 250,000 people in a single morning, the devout and the sinner alike, with no discrimination. The existence of parasitic wasps that lay their eggs inside a living caterpillar, the larvae slowly eating it from the inside out to survive. This is reality. This is the world that Cognition A's God supposedly designed and actively maintains. The dissonance this creates is immense. The mind recoils. How can an all-good and all-powerful being stand by and allow, or worse, author such things? A loving human parent would move heaven and earth to prevent such suffering in their child. To suggest that a cosmic parent, with infinite power, would not, creates a psychological schism of epic proportions. So how does the religious mind, following Bob Smoker's example, resolve this? Changing the behavior is not an option here, but changing the belief is. One could simply abandon Cognition A, conclude that such a God does not exist, and the dissonance would vanish instantly. This is, of course, the path a skeptic or atheist takes, but for the believer, this is tantamount to psychological suicide. Their entire worldview, their community, their hope for an afterlife, their sense of purpose, all of it is built upon Cognition A. To discard it is to discard the self. Therefore, they are forced into the other strategies, minimizing the conflict or adding new consonant cognitions. And this is where theology and apologetics truly shine, not as disciplines of truth-seeking, but as masterful exercises in dissonance reduction. Religion has developed a sophisticated toolkit of intellectual balms and philosophical patches, specifically designed to soothe the anxiety caused by the problem of evil. The first tool is free will. The argument goes that God gave humanity the freedom to choose between good and evil. The suffering we see is the unfortunate but necessary consequence of that freedom. God could intervene, but to do so would be to violate our free will, turning us into mere puppets. This is a brilliant move. It shifts the blame for moral evil from God to humanity. But it's a leaky bucket. It does absolutely nothing to explain the fawn in the forest fire or the child with cancer. It doesn't explain natural evil. This is where the apologist has to patch the patch, introducing yet another idea like the fall of man, suggesting that Adam and Eve's sin corrupted not just humanity, but the entire natural order of creation, introducing death, disease, and disaster into a previously perfect world. This, of course, is an extraordinary claim, requiring belief in talking snakes and a literal Garden of Eden, adding yet more fantastic beliefs to the pile in order to save the original one. The second, and perhaps most powerful tool, is the appeal to mysterious ways. The argument is simple. God's intellect is infinite and ours is finite. His plan is so vast and complex that we cannot possibly comprehend it from our limited perspective. What appears to us as senseless suffering is actually a necessary and meaningful part of a grand divine tapestry. This is a masterful dissonance reduction technique because it directly attacks the believer's right to feel dissonant. It reframes their confusion not as a logical flaw in the belief system, but as a personal flaw, a failure of humility and faith on their part. The message is, the problem is not that my beliefs are contradictory. The problem is that you are too simple-minded to understand God's coherence. It's an intellectual shutdown, a thought-terminating cliché that seals the core belief away from the corrosive effects of critical thought. The discomfort is alleviated by surrendering the right to understand. A third tool is reframing suffering as a positive good. You'll hear phrases like, suffering is a test of faith, or it builds character, or God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. This is a classic example of adding a consonant cognition. Yes, suffering exists, and it is bad, cognition B, but it serves a higher purpose that is ultimately good, new cognition C. This transforms a negative into a positive. The pain of the child with cancer is no longer a mark against God's goodness, but is instead a mysterious, even sacred tool for the spiritual growth of the parents, or a test for the child's soul. To an outside observer, this can seem monstrously cruel, justifying agony by labeling it a test. But from inside the system, it is a desperate and necessary balm to make the world make sense again. And finally, the ultimate dissonance killer, the promise of an afterlife. This tool reduces the importance of cognition B, the reality of earthly suffering, to almost zero. The argument is that this life, with all its pain and injustice, is an infinitesimally brief and insignificant prelude to an eternity of bliss in heaven. In the face of infinite, perfect joy, what are 70 or 80 years of hardship? It's nothing. This one belief has the power to dwarf any and all evidence of earthly injustice. A child's death is not a tragedy, but a fast-track ticket to paradise. A life of poverty and misery is not a sign of a cruel world, but a brief trial before an eternal reward. It is perhaps the most potent tool in the entire arsenal, capable of plastering over almost any crack in the theological firmament. What are some of the explanations or justifications you've heard for suffering, or perhaps for other religious contradictions, that just didn't sit right with you? Maybe it was a justification you once found comforting, but which started to feel thin over time. The journey out of faith is often a story of these dissonance-reducing tools failing, one by one. Share your experience with a particularly memorable one in the comments below. Your story could be the one that helps someone else recognize the mental gymnastics they're performing. This same pattern repeats itself across countless other domains of belief. Take the concept of miracles. Cognition. A. My holy book is true and describes God performing miracles such as parting the seas, curing the blind, or raising the dead. I believe that God can and does intervene in the world and answers prayers. Cognition. B. My entire lived experience and the cumulative knowledge of science demonstrates a universe that operates according to rigid, predictable, and unbreakable physical laws. Gravity never takes a day off. Sepsis is not cured by prayer. Amputated limbs do not grow back. The dissonance is palpable. How can one simultaneously believe in a world of supernatural intervention and live in a world of unyielding natural law? Once again, the mind must work to resolve the conflict. You can't change cognition B, reality is relentless. So you must manage cognition A. How? One way is to compartmentalize. The miracles happened back then in a special, sacred time when God was more active. They don't happen now, or at least not in the same overt way. This moves the belief into a protected, unfalsifiable past. Another way is to redefine the word miracle. Suddenly, the birth of any baby is a miracle. The beauty of a sunset is a miracle. The fact that your cancer went into remission after 6 rounds of chemotherapy and a new experimental drug is chalked up not to the doctors and scientists, but to a miracle from God in response to prayer. The word is diluted of all its supernatural meaning, stretched to cover ordinary, if wonderful events, thereby reducing the dissonance. The believer gets to keep the comforting idea of an interventionist God without having it so flagrantly contradicted by the fact that God never seems to intervene in a way that would unambiguously violate the laws of physics before a panel of skeptical scientists. It allows the belief to survive in the face of a non-miraculous world. The prayer paradox. Let's move from the grand and cosmic to the deeply personal. Prayer? It is the intimate, direct line of communication with the divine, the most fundamental act of faith for billions. Here, the dissonance becomes even more acute, because it is not an abstract theological problem, but a lived, daily experiment whose results are constantly pouring in. The cognitive setup is straightforward. Cognition. I believe in a personal God who hears my prayers and has the power to intervene in my life for the better. When I pray for something, it can happen. Cognition. BN. I have prayed for my mother's cancer to be cured, and she died. I have prayed for a job and remained unemployed. I have prayed for peace and see only war. The overwhelming majority of specific, testable requests I make through prayer do not come to pass. The conflict here is as raw as a nerve ending. Every unanswered prayer is a small piece of evidence against cognition A. Every tragedy that befalls a praying person is a data point suggesting the phone line is dead. So how does the mind, desperate to maintain its connection to a loving, listening God, resolve this? It doesn't abandon the act of praying. That would be an admission of defeat. Instead, it deploys an array of sophisticated psychological defense mechanisms to protect the core belief. The first and most common is a powerful combination of confirmation bias and selective memory. The human brain is not a neutral recorder of events. It is a storyteller that seeks patterns to confirm its preferred narrative. The believer does not remember the 500 times they prayed for a good parking spot and had to circle the lot for 10 minutes. But they will remember with vivid, crystalline clarity the one time they were running late for a crucial meeting, whispered a frantic prayer, and a car pulled out right in front of them. This one hit is not treated as a statistical anomaly, a coincidence, or a random fluctuation in a chaotic system. It is elevated to the status of a miracle, a direct personal sign from the Almighty. It is imbued with immense emotional and spiritual significance, while the hundreds of misses are simply discarded, forgotten, and left on the cutting room floor of the mind's editing suite. The believer isn't consciously lying. Their cognitive biases are actively filtering reality for them, presenting a curated highlight reel of answered prayers that reinforces the belief, making it feel empirically verified even when the complete dataset would show the exact opposite. When a prayer is too big to ignore its failure, like a prayer for the life of a loved one, a different tool is required. This is where the religious mind performs a truly breathtaking maneuver. It redefines the nature of the answer. You will hear the phrase, "God answered our prayers." It's just that his answer was no. Pause and consider the genius of this statement. It takes an event that flatly contradicts the idea of a positively intervening God, the death of the loved one, and magically transforms it into a confirmation of that God's existence and communication. The system becomes completely unfalsifiable. If the person lives, the prayer was answered yes. If the person dies, the prayer was answered no. If the person lingers in a painful state of near death, God's answer is wait. No possible outcome can disprove the efficacy of prayer because every outcome is retroactively defined as an answer. The dissonance is resolved by creating a closed, logical loop from which evidence has no escape. It's like betting on a horse race and then, after the race is over, claiming you secretly bet on whichever horse happened to win. But the most sophisticated tool of all is the complete reframing of prayer's purpose. As the evidence mounts that prayer is ineffective as a tool for manipulating external reality, the believer, feeling the pressure of that dissonance, shifts the goalposts. They will begin to say things like, prayer isn't about asking for things, it's not a cosmic vending machine. It's about changing me, it's about finding peace, aligning my will with God's will, and feeling a sense of connection. This is the ultimate dissonance reduction technique. It takes prayer, an act predicated on external intervention, and turns it into an act of internal, psychological self-regulation. And on that level, it works. The act of sitting quietly, focusing one's thoughts, verbalizing one's anxieties and hopes, this is a form of meditation. It does reduce stress. It can bring a sense of peace and perspective. But notice what has happened. The supernatural claim has been subtly swapped out for a purely psychological one. The believer resolves the dissonance of unanswered prayers by unconsciously conceding that prayer doesn't actually change the world. It just changes how they feel about the world. They get to keep the comforting ritual of prayer while neatly sidestepping the mountain of evidence that it has no effect on the tumors, tsunamis, or parking spots of the external world. The prison of a pious identity. We have explored the dissonance created by specific doctrines, but perhaps the most powerful and agonizing form of cognitive dissonance arises when the very foundations of a believer's identity are threatened. For many, religious belief is not just a set of propositions they assent to, it is the bedrock of who they are. Let's frame the conflict. Cognition. A. I am a devout Christian/Muslim/Jew. My entire life has been built on this truth. My morality, my community, my sense of purpose, and my hope for the future are all inextricably linked to my faith. I am a good, intelligent person who has dedicated my life to the correct path. Cognition. B. A creeping, terrifying thought, perhaps sparked by a science documentary, a historical text, a logical contradiction, or the simple observation of hypocrisy within their religious community. The core tenets of my faith seem to be factually untrue. The science of evolution contradicts Genesis. The historical record doesn't support the Exodus. The morality taught in my holy book seems barbaric by modern standards. My leaders are fallible and sometimes corrupt human beings. This is not like Bob the smoker who can rationalize a single bad habit. This is like Bob realizing the entire concept of health he's built his life around might be a complete fabrication. The dissonance is shattering. To accept cognition B is to call cognition A, the very self, a lie. It implies I have been deluded. I have wasted my time, my money, my emotional energy. I have based my life's most important decisions on a falsehood. The psychological pain of this realization is so immense that the mind will construct its most formidable defenses to keep it at bay. The primary defense here is fueled by a cognitive bias known as the sunk cost fallacy. This is the tendency for people to continue with an endeavor if they have already invested significant resources, time, money, or effort into it, even if the current evidence suggests that cutting their losses is the best decision. The more you have invested in your faith, the more Sundays you've spent in a pew, the more money you've tithed, the more relationships you've built within the church, the more personal sacrifices you've made in the name of your beliefs, the harder it becomes to walk away. Each investment acts like another bar on the cage. To leave would be to admit that this entire massive investment was for nothing. The mind recoils from this conclusion, so instead of cutting its losses, it doubles down. It insists the investment must be sound. The nagging doubt, cognition B, is violently suppressed, labeled as a test of faith, a temptation from the devil, or a sign of sinful pride. The believer resolves the dissonance not by examining the evidence, but by reaffirming their commitment, often with more fervor than before. They start attending church more often, praying more intensely, or reading apologetics that are designed specifically to reinforce their existing beliefs. They are not investing more because they are more certain. They are investing more because they are terrified by their uncertainty. This is powerfully amplified by the social dimension of religion. Faith is rarely a solitary affair. It comes with a built-in community, a powerful, comforting, and reinforcing network of friends, family, and leaders. This community acts as a massive external dissonance reduction machine. When an individual's faith wavers, the community rallies around them, offering prayers, quoting scripture, and sharing testimonies. They create a plausibility structure, an echo chamber where the core beliefs are constantly repeated and validated, while dissenting views are dismissed or demonized. The dissonant thoughts of the doubter are drowned out by the harmonious choir of the faithful. Furthermore, this community often holds the threat of social ostracism as a weapon. To admit to your doubts, to truly embrace cognition B, could mean losing everything. Your spouse might leave you, your parents might disown you. You would lose your friends, your social life, your support system. The dissonance is now between intellectual integrity, I must follow the evidence, and social survival, I must maintain my relationships. For many, the choice is tragically simple. They choose survival. They learn to perform a kind of doublethink, pushing their doubts deep down into a locked part of their mind, while outwardly performing the rituals and speaking the language of belief. They live with a constant low-grade hum of unresolved dissonance, a quiet agony that they feel they must endure to keep their world from falling apart. Leaving faith for many is not an intellectual exercise. It is an act of profound social suicide, and it requires a level of courage that is almost impossible to overstate. The mind in the mirage. So we see that religion, far from being a simple set of ancient beliefs, is an incredibly sophisticated psychological operating system. It is exquisitely designed to first induce a state of profound cognitive dissonance by positing a reality of perfect goodness, justice, and supernatural order, and then placing its followers in a world that provides constant, undeniable evidence to the contrary. Then, having created the ailment, it sells the cure. It provides a comprehensive toolkit of thought-terminating cliches, unfalsifiable claims, and emotional defense mechanisms. Free will, mysterious ways, the promise of an afterlife, the redefinition of prayer, the power of community, all designed to soothe the mental stress it itself creates. The God Mirage of the channel's name is not just the illusion of God himself, but the shimmering, unstable reality that the faithful mind must constantly fight to maintain. It is the mirage of a benevolent plan shimmering over a landscape of real suffering. It is the mirage of purpose painted onto a canvas of cosmic indifference. It is a psychological construct of immense power, but it is a draining one. The mental gymnastics required to hold two contradictory ideas in the mind simultaneously, that God is good and that a child is dying in agony, that prayer works and that prayers go unanswered, is exhausting. It is a constant low-level stress on the cognitive system. For those who have found their way out of this system, the experience is often described not as a loss of faith, but as a release of tension. It is the feeling of finally putting down a great invisible weight that one didn't even realize one was carrying. It is the peace that comes not from finding comforting answers, but from no longer having to force the pieces of a puzzle to fit when they so clearly do not. This exploration isn't about mockery. It's about understanding. It's about recognizing the immense psychological forces at play that keep intelligent, good-hearted people locked into belief systems that defy logic and evidence. It is a testament not to human stupidity, but to the mind's profound, desperate, and often beautiful quest for consistency, meaning, and comfort in a chaotic world. Thank you for joining us at the God Mirage. If these ideas resonated with you and you want to continue exploring the fascinating intersection of psychology, skepticism, and religion, please make sure you like this video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell. For those of you who have walked this path, what did it feel like for you when that dissonance finally resolved? What was the last piece of the puzzle that refused to fit, forcing you to look at the whole picture differently. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters. Until next time, keep thinking.